This is Still Unanswered. I'm Elena Marquez. Today, we return to a case that still feels like a chill running through modern America's everyday life. The Chicago Tylenol murders of 1982. 7 people dead, poisoned by extra-strength Tylenol capsules laced with potassium cyanide. Random, invisible, unsolved. Marcus, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Elena. It's always hard to talk about this one without feeling that quiet outrage. The method, the randomness, it still sits with me.
Let's start where most listeners will already know the headlines, but I want us to hold the human detail close. On the morning of September 29, 1982, a 12-year-old named Mary Kellerman took extra-strength Tylenol for a cold and collapsed. She didn't make it. That same day, a postal worker, Adam Janus, takes pills. He dies. His brother Stanley and Stanley's wife Theresa later take pills from the same bottle at Adam's house, and they die too. By October 1, 7 people across the Chicago area were dead. Paula Prince, a flight attendant, appears on surveillance buying Tylenol on camera. She would be found dead 2 days later.
Those early days, you can almost feel the knot tightening in the city. And in a way, that detail about the Janus bottle is haunting. One family wiped out by a single contaminated bottle. It makes the whole method feel personal and impersonal at once.
Right. Helen Jensen, a nurse. She sees the bottle in the Janus home, notices 6 capsules missing from a newly bought bottle, checks the receipt, and she sparks the investigation into product tampering. A public health official with a hunch. That moment changes everything.
Yeah. It's a reminder that sometimes the most consequential breakthroughs come from observing ordinary things. Jensen handing that bottle to investigator Nick Pishos, the bottle being smelled and the bitter almond odor interpreted, those are the human chain links that made cyanide the suspected cause rather than a bizarre medical mystery.
Let's pause on cyanide for a second, Marcus. Potassium cyanide. Why is it such a perfect weapon for this kind of attack, and why did it cause such alarm?
Potassium cyanide acts very quickly. In crystalline form, it's a white powder, soluble, and in capsule form, it can be mixed or substituted for a powder medication quite easily. It has a characteristic faint, bitter almond smell, though not everyone can detect it. In 1982, the doses found in some capsules were massive. A single capsule contained enough to be instantly lethal. And crucially, from an attacker's tactical point of view, it leaves little time for victims or bystanders to intervene. That speed and stealth made it terrifying. It turned a bottle on a shelf into a potential instrument of mass harm.
Terrifying. And that terror spread fast. Chicago authorities and the state warned the public, don't take Tylenol. Police drove through neighborhoods with loudspeakers. Stores pulled shelves clean. Johnson & Johnson, at first acting locally, then launched an unprecedented nationwide recall, some 31 million bottles, costing well over $100 million in 1982 dollars. James Burke, the chairman, went on camera. The company halted production, advertising, and then, months later, reintroduced Tylenol with triple-seal tamper-evident packaging. That response is often taught as a model for crisis communication. But, Marcus, was it all pure altruism?
It's tempting to evaluate it as a kind of moral clarity. Prioritize public safety over profits, even if that costs you everything in the short term. And to be fair, J&J's rapid recall and transparency likely prevented more deaths and helped rebuild trust. But we also have to be realistic. Corporations are risk-averse in a way that often aligns with ethical choices. Taking decisive action was also the best way to protect a valuable brand. So, both ethical imperative and shrewd business strategy. The difference matters for how we teach crisis response, but it doesn't diminish the immediate benefit to consumers.
By the mid-80s, Tylenol had recovered much of its market share, but the murders left another legacy. Congress passed the Federal Anti-Tampering Act in 1983. The FDA set tamper-evident packaging guidelines. We now assume shrink wraps, foil seals, blister packs. We accept the extra cost as the price of ordinary safety. But those structural changes didn't close the case. The question, who did this, remains stubbornly unanswered for more than 4 decades.
And that's what makes the case so haunting. It rewired public behavior and law, but the central human need, someone to blame, someone to hold accountable, was largely unmet.
We need to dig into suspects. Marcus James W. Lewis is almost a household name in this story. He wrote an extortion letter demanding $1 million, claiming he'd stop the killings. He was caught, convicted of the extortion, sent to prison, but never charged with murder. Walk us through why Lewis became the prime suspect and why the case against him never stuck.
Lewis checks a lot of boxes that make him appear sinister in hindsight. He had a history of questionable, sometimes violent schemes. He wrote a letter that displayed knowledge of details not fully in the public record. He told investigators, and later journalists, scenarios about how someone might carry out the attacks. He was tied to lakeside travel through his wife and the extortion network. Those things created a powerful circumstantial picture. But circumstantial evidence is not the same as physical proof. There was no DNA match to Lewis from the bottles that we publicly know about, no fingerprinting that tied him in. Travel records were murky, but not conclusively placing him in Chicago at the relevant moments. Prosecutors couldn't bridge that gap to the standard required for murder charges. So he became the poster villain of a case that still lacks direct proof.
And then there was the odd wrinkle in 2009, where the FBI reopened the case, re-examined the extortion letter timeline, and suggested Lewis may have begun writing it before the murders became public knowledge. That suggests pre-knowledge, but again, not proof of placing cyanide in capsules. It's maddening.
It is. And there's also the human factor. Lewis was an extortionist. Even if he didn't kill anyone, his letter fundamentally altered the investigation's energy and public narrative. Investigators followed leads generated by the extortion, resources went that way, and the public fixation shaped the media story. Sometimes an extortionist can become a red herring or a direct clue. We still don't know which it was in Lewis's case.
Another named suspect was Roger Arnold, a dock worker at a jewel warehouse. He had books on poisons, lab glassware, a vague history with cyanide, and local ties to people connected to victims. Police searched his home. Years later, DNA from his exhumed femur didn't match material from the bottles. But his story took a darker turn. He later shot and killed an innocent man he mistakenly thought had turned him in. He was convicted of murder. That cascade, suspicion leading to another tragedy, really shows the cost of unresolved cases, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Roger Arnold's arc is one of those terrible side effects of high-profile unsolved cases. The constant glare, the rumor mill, the idea of being a suspect can radicalize someone or destroy a life. Arnold's violent response, killing John Stanisha, didn't get us any closer to the Tylenol killer. It created another family that never asked to be dragged into this.
One word: collateral.
Yes, collateral damage of suspicion.
I want to return to method and the limitations investigators faced. In 1982, there was little CCTV, no modern DNA, the tools we take for granted today. Marcus, what exactly would be different if the Tylenol murders happened in 2026?
A lot would probably be different. For starters, retail cameras are ubiquitous now. Even small stores often have high-resolution cameras that can pick up precise timestamps and recognize faces. Purchases are frequently tied to debit and credit cards, loyalty accounts, or digital receipts, so you could trace who bought specific bottles and when. Distribution is more traceable. Lot numbers, barcodes, and interconnected inventory systems make it easier to trace a particular bottle's path. And modern DNA and trace evidence techniques are far more sensitive. You might find skin cells on capsules, touch DNA on lids, or trace chemical residues that tie to a particular source. In short, the probabilistic space where an investigator could act is much smaller now. That doesn't mean it would be solved for sure, but it would be easier.
It's a bitter comfort for victims' families, thinking that if this had happened later, maybe they'd have answers. Instead, they live with decades of ambiguous evidence, media speculation, and sometimes even misinformation. Families have said they want truth more than vengeance. But after 40 years, what does justice even look like? Marcus?
Justice in cold cases can morph. For a family, a confession can be healing. A conviction can be satisfying. Sometimes it's as small as a sealed file being opened to them. In other cases, it's public acknowledgement that investigators have not forgotten. Practically, with old evidence, justice today sometimes requires that the right piece of physical evidence still exists. Bottles, swabs, uncontaminated surfaces that can now be retested with newer technology. If those remain in evidence lockers, we live with the possibility that science will offer new answers. But there are cases where the physical link is gone, destroyed, discarded, or degraded. And then justice becomes truth-telling and memory.
Memory matters. Naming victims matters. So let's name a few more of those 7. Mary Kellerman, Adam Janus, Stanley and Theresa Janus, Mary Lynn Reiner, Mary McFarland, and Paula Prince. We should say their names and not lose sight of the way ordinary acts, taking a pill for a headache, ended lives.
Yes. It's why, as an investigator or a historian, the human detail is essential. We talk about methods and statutes and packaging, but those were real people with families, routines, jobs.
Paula Prince, buying Tylenol on camera. That image in the public sphere is chilling, partly because it's so ordinary. She's captured at a Walgreens register, completely unaware that those capsules would kill her. It's the randomness that produces the unease. Anyone could have been next.
That's right. The randomness is key to the terror. Most mass murders have a target, or a rationale, a pattern. This one weaponized an everyday item. The idea that something you buy at the store could be a killer reshapes public trust in consumer goods.
Which feeds into how regulators and companies responded afterwards. The FDA's tamper-evident packaging guidelines, the Anti-Tampering Act. These were structural responses to a new kind of risk. Do you think the law was adequate?
It was a necessary, immediate response. The Federal Anti-Tampering Act filled a gap, making product tampering a federal offense with severe penalties. But of course, no law can stop every malicious act. Laws help define crime and punish it, and they give investigators a tool to coordinate across jurisdictions. The bigger long-term change was industry practice. Manufacturers rethinking packaging and distribution, and retailers paying more attention to shelf security. In a sense, the case forced the private sector to internalize public safety in a way they hadn't before.
And yet, we've had copycats. Stella Nickel, in 1986, poisoned Excedrin capsules in Washington. But that case showed a different motive, insurance fraud disguised as random tampering. She was convicted. That case illustrates an awful truth. The Tylenol murders created a script that others could exploit. It's like a dark incubator of method.
Yes, the Nickel case is a cautionary tale. Discovering a method creates templates for others with different motives. It also shows the robustness of the law introduced after Tylenol. That statute allowed prosecutors to pursue Nickel for tampering when they otherwise might have had less leverage.
Let's step back into the investigation itself. With tainted bottles from multiple manufacturing plants, Pennsylvania and Texas, the consensus at the time was that tampering happened post-manufacture, likely at the retail level. How do investigators reach that conclusion?
They map contamination to lot numbers, batch numbers, and geographic distribution. If all contaminated bottles originate from a single production lot that never left a single plant, you'd suspect the problem began in the supply chain. But when you get tampered bottles connected to multiple plants and different lot numbers, and those bottles are discovered on local store shelves across a region, your working hypothesis shifts to post-manufacture tampering. Someone buying bottles locally, altering the capsules, and returning them to various stores. That pattern of distribution, combined with what we know about capsule construction at the time, easily opened gelatin shells that could be resealed, pointed to a retail-level tamperer.
What about behavioral profiling? The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit weighed in, trying to imagine the type of person who would do this. John Douglas and others suggested someone who understood cyanide, had grievance, or a desire for control. Is there value in that type of profiling, or is it too speculative?
Profiling can be useful as a heuristic. It helps investigators prioritize leads, consider likely behaviors, and identify probable occupational or psychosocial backgrounds. But it's not evidence. Good profiling is probabilistic, not determinative. In this case, profiling suggested someone with access to cyanide or knowledge of poisons, maybe an industrial worker, a hobbyist chemist, someone in a trade using cyanide. That fits some suspects, but not conclusively. The danger is when profiling becomes fixation and eclipses other investigative angles.
And fixation can mean missed leads.
It can. Investigations are human endeavors. They can suffer from cognitive biases.
Let's touch on media ethics for a moment. The FBI asked the Chicago Tribune to publish details, even the address and grave location of Mary Kellerman, to see if the killer would visit. Families consented. That tactic sits uncomfortably with me. Your reaction?
It is uncomfortable. Using the media as bait can be effective in crowdsourced surveillance. Someone might be caught visiting a grave, and that could generate leads. But ethically, it's fraught. Families are asked to relive trauma publicly, and the press becomes a tool of law enforcement rather than an independent watcher. Sometimes those choices are pragmatic, sometimes they're pressured. We have to ask whether the ends justified the emotional cost to the families.
Some families saw it as a necessary step. Others felt exploited. That tension between public interest and private pain haunts this case, too. Marcus, what do you make of the Netflix docuseries from 2025? It brought renewed attention, got the only on-camera interview with James Lewis late in his life. Did it move the needle?
The docuseries shook loose public conversation and highlighted inconsistencies in Lewis's narratives. That can be valuable for public understanding. But documentaries also have editorial perspectives. They shape the story. Interviewing Lewis gave voice to a suspect who had previously been a shadowy figure, and that can be useful for analysis. But it doesn't substitute for new forensic evidence. What it did do, though, was remind people of how unsettled the case remains and reopened questions about who the press, investigators, and the public had and still have a duty to suspect and protect.
I want to emphasize this. Being the chief suspect in the public imagination is not the same as being convicted. Families want answers, yes, but we also have lives of people who were never charged, like Lewis, scarred by suspicion in different ways. We have to hold two truths. One, the public deserves clarity. Two, accusation is not the same as proof.
That's a crucial balance. As professionals, we ought to say clearly what is evidence and what is conjecture. And as citizens, we must resist filling gaps with narratives that satisfy our hunger for closure but may be unfair.
Let's circle back to the cost of not knowing. The Janus family, 3 deaths from a single bottle. Their grief is multi-generational. People have spent decades asking whether there were more victims, people whose deaths weren't linked. The sense that something ordinary could kill you at random reshaped how people used over-the-counter medication. It changed habits. It changed trust. That unresolved dread is part of what Still Unanswered is about.
And from a criminological standpoint, unsolved cases have social ripple effects. They alter community behavior, influence policy, and sometimes create moral panics. The Tylenol case did all three. But it also drove constructive change, better packaging, stronger laws, more transparent corporate responses. Those are real, if bittersweet, outcomes.
Bitter, yes. People often ask whether investigators destroyed any evidence or missed clear leads. Were there missteps that we can point at?
With hindsight, there are always things you can critique. Forensic methods were limited. Evidence that today would be cataloged differently might have been handled under different protocols back then. But there's no smoking gun mistake that everyone agrees derailed the case. Rather, it's a mosaic of limits, technological, procedural, and the constraints of rapidly escalating public panic. Plus, the extortion letter diverted resources and narrative focus. Whether that materially destroyed the case is debated.
I want to read a short excerpt from a family statement. We want the truth, not just headlines. We want someone to tell us why our mother, our daughter, our sister, why did this happen? That plea, simple and aching, has been with the Janus family and others for decades. Marcus, if you were advising investigators today with the materials that still exist, what would you prioritize?
First, securing and cataloging every physical item that remains, bottles, swabs, notes, receipts, and ensuring they are available for retesting. Second, a fresh review of case files with modern data analysis, patterns, previously unconnected purchases, postmarks, and travel records. Third, employing contemporary forensic methods on any biological material, touch DNA, new chemical assays. Fourth, structured re-interviews of witnesses using modern cognitive interviewing techniques, and finally, a cold case review team that avoids tunnel vision, diverse perspectives, transparency with families, and a clear communication plan about what can reasonably be expected.
That sounds careful and humane.
It has to be. Cold cases need not just forensic rigor, but sensitivity to the victims. Families deserve to be informed and treated with dignity.
We've talked a lot about suspects and systems. I want to ask a harder question now. If you had to weigh probabilities, not certainties, who seems the most plausible perpetrator, given the public record? A disgruntled insider? A random lone wolf with chemical knowledge? James Lewis? Or someone else entirely?
We have to be humble here. The publicly disclosed evidence leaves room for multiple plausible hypotheses. The pattern of retail-level tampering points towards someone operating in the Chicago area with access to cyanide and a willingness to handle and reseal capsules. Lewis's extortion makes him a person of interest, given his background and the timing of the letter, but lack of physical ties weakens the case. An industrial worker with access, or a local chemist, is plausible. A lone nihilist motivated by chaos is also plausible. I'd say the strongest working hypothesis remains a local, opportunistic offender with chemical knowledge who acted alone. But that's probabilistic, not definitive.
That uncertainty is what keeps people up at night. Before we close, I want to acknowledge something that should be obvious. Every step in this story touches living people. Families have campaigned, grieved, and some, while grateful for J&J's rapid recall, are still haunted by the fact that their loved ones' deaths sparked a national panic. That national panic changed the world, legally, commercially, but it didn't give them answers. Marcus, final thoughts?
We should remember the case for both its systemic effects and its human cost. The Tylenol murders transformed how corporations think about safety and how regulators legislate. They led to packaging innovations that likely saved lives. But the unresolved nature of the murders, the speculation, the human collateral, Arnold's tragedy, families' decades-long grief, remind us that reforms don't fix grief. We still owe those families the best possible investigative attention, and we must be careful about turning people into easy villains without evidence.
Thank you, Marcus. And to our listeners, we'll include a detailed timeline and sources in the episode notes. If you have tips, things you believe law enforcement should revisit, please submit them to the Arlington Heights Police Cold Case Unit, not to us. This episode exists to hold memory, to press for clarity where we can, and to remind people that the human cost of unsolved crimes doesn't fade because the headlines do. Before we go, I want to play a short moment, an audio artifact from 1982. It's James Burke addressing the nation, a J&J response. We will do everything we can. That steadiness then and our unsettledness now sit uneasily together.
They do. It's a reminder that even well-handled crises can't heal every wound.
One last thing. For those who are studying how to improve forensic responses and corporate duty, the lessons of the Tylenol murders are etched in law and in packaging. For the victims and families, the lesson is incomplete, names without answers. Marcus, thank you again. And to everyone listening, say the names, remember the people, and keep asking questions. This case is still unanswered. I'm Elena Marquez. Until next time.
Thank you, Elena. And to the families listening, you are not forgotten.